Noah Rivera, a struggling teen with big dreams, that moment came when he stopped to help a stranger on the street, an act that would unlock a connection to his past, a mentor he never expected, and a chance to chase the impossible. But life isn't that simple. With every dream comes sacrifice, and Noah's journey is filled with challenges, heartbreak, and moments that will leave you on the edge of your seat. Before we dive in, let us know. What time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. "Noah, pass it!" yelled Jake Turner, his lanky frame darting across the court, hand raised in anticipation. Noah Rivera, 16, didn't flinch. With his tattered sneakers barely gripping the uneven ground, he dribbled past his opponent, a boy at least a foot taller, before crossing him over with a swift spin. The crowd of local teens, sprawled along the chain-link fence, erupted into cheers. Jake groaned dramatically. Or, "Just take the shot yourself." Noah grinned, launching the ball into the air. It arced gracefully against the skyline before swishing clean through the makeshift hoop. The crowd roared louder, clapping and jeering at the other team. "Noah Rivera for the win!" someone shouted from the sidelines, mimicking a sports announcer. The game wasn't over yet, though. The opposing team hustled to regain control, determined to wipe the smug grin off Noah's face. The next 10 minutes were intense. Players collided, sneakers screeched, and trash talk filled the air. Through it all, Noah stood out, not just for his skill, but for his grit. His old basketball shoes, with soles nearly worn through, slid across the asphalt as he sprinted back and forth, outpacing everyone. Finally, the whistle blew. Noah's team won by a single point. The teens on the court and the sideline burst into chatter, recounting the game's highlights. Jake jogged over, panting. "You've got to stop making it look easy, man. It's bad for my ego." Noah smirked, tossing the ball to him. "Maybe if you practiced more?" Jake clutched his chest mockingly. "Low blow, Rivera." The two boys settled onto the edge of the court, their laughter fading as the evening chill set in. Jake dribbled the ball absent-mindedly, watching as Noah's expression grew more somber. "You're thinking about it again, aren't you?" Jake asked softly. Noah hesitated, then nodded. "It's all I think about." "Making it to the NBA?" Noah looked down at his hands, rough from hours of practice. "Yeah, but it feels impossible, you know? I can't even afford new shoes, let alone join a real team or get noticed by scouts." Jake leaned back, resting the ball on his knees. "You've got the skills. You just need a break, something to get you out of here." Noah laughed bitterly. "Breaks don't come for kids like us, Jake." Jake frowned but didn't argue. The unspoken truth lingered between them. Detroit wasn't kind to dreamers. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, and the court's makeshift lights flickered to life. Noah stood, brushing the dust off his worn jeans. "Same time tomorrow?" Jake asked, hopeful. Noah nodded. "Always." The Detroit evening was alive with the hum of distant traffic, the occasional shout from a nearby alley, and the rhythmic squeak of Noah's worn sneakers on the sidewalk. The city was a constant blur of motion, its streets lined with weathered buildings that bore the scars of better days. Noah adjusted the strap of his backpack, his mind drifting back to the game earlier. As he approached a busy intersection, the familiar chaos of rush hour greeted him. Cars honked impatiently, and pedestrians weaved through the crowd with practiced ease. But something unusual caught Noah's eye. Across the street, an elderly man in a wheelchair was struggling. His face was pale, and his hand clutched his chest tightly as if trying to steady himself. The man's wheelchair jolted on the uneven pavement, and before Noah could process what was happening, the man slumped forward, but no one stopped. Noah's heart raced. Without thinking, he dropped his backpack and darted through the throng of people. The man was now leaning precariously to one side, his breathing shallow and labored. "Sir? Sir? Can you hear me?" Noah knelt beside the man, his voice steady despite the panic bubbling inside him. The man's eyes fluttered open briefly, filled with pain but also confusion. Noah quickly pulled out his phone and dialed 911. "I need an ambulance at 3rd and Elm Street. An elderly man is having chest pains and just collapsed." His words were quick but clear. The dispatcher's voice was calm. "Help is on the way. Stay with him." Noah put the phone down and turned back to the man. "It's going to be okay. The ambulance is coming. Just hang in there." The man tried to speak but managed only a faint whisper. Noah leaned in closer. "Thank you." Noah nodded, gripping the wheelchair to keep it steady. "Don't worry about that. Just stay with me, okay?" Minutes felt like hours as Noah stayed crouched beside the man, his eyes darting between the street and the elderly figure. The man's breathing was shallow but steady, and Noah did his best to keep him conscious, talking to him about anything that came to mind. Finally, the wail of sirens cut through the city's noise. Noah waved frantically as the ambulance pulled up. 2 paramedics jumped out, rushing to assess the situation. "What happened?" one of them asked, crouching beside Noah. "He clutched his chest and collapsed," Noah explained. "He was like this when I got here." The paramedics nodded, lifting the man onto a stretcher with practiced efficiency. They checked his vitals and hooked him up to an oxygen mask. As they prepared to load the stretcher into the ambulance, the man's eyes fluttered open again. He looked at Noah, his gaze filled with gratitude despite his weakened state. "You," he murmured. "Good kid." Noah felt a lump rise in his throat. "You're going to be okay. They'll take care of you." The paramedics offered Noah a quick nod of thanks before shutting the ambulance doors. The vehicle sped off, its lights cutting through the darkening streets. Noah stood there for a moment, his hands still gripping the wheelchair. Around him, the city resumed its indifferent hustle, as if nothing had happened. But for Noah, something felt different. He glanced at the wheelchair, then at the spot where the man had been lying moments ago. For reasons he couldn't quite explain, Noah felt compelled to follow up. Maybe it was the man's faint smile of gratitude, or maybe, for the first time, Noah felt like he had made a real difference. The walk back to his apartment was quieter than usual, the events of the evening replaying in his mind. With every step, he couldn't help but think about the man, Mr. Caldwell, and the way he had looked at him, as though Noah had done something extraordinary. When Noah finally reached his building, the old brick facade seemed even more worn under the dim streetlights. He lugged the wheelchair up the creaky staircase to his family's cramped apartment on the 2nd floor. Inside, the familiar smell of Elena Rivera's late-night cooking greeted him. His mother, wearing her work uniform, stood by the stove stirring a pot. She glanced over her shoulder as he entered. "You're late," she said, her tone a mix of worry and exasperation. "And what is that?" "A wheelchair," Noah replied simply, setting it in the corner of the room. Elena turned fully to face him, her eyebrows raised. "A wheelchair? Noah, where did you—" "I found a man, an older guy. He collapsed in the street. I called for an ambulance, but they didn't take the chair." Elena's expression softened. She placed a hand on her hip, letting out a sigh. "You've always had a soft heart, mijo. Just don't let it get you into trouble." Noah nodded, too tired to argue. He grabbed a plate from the counter, filled it with a small portion of rice and beans, and sat at the table. The wheelchair sat silently in the corner, a strange but tangible reminder of the night. As he ate, Noah glanced at it again, wondering if he'd ever see Mr. Caldwell again. Somehow, he felt like he would. The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital cast a sterile glow over the quiet lobby as Noah Rivera stepped inside, the wheelchair from last night's incident clutched tightly in his hands. His sneakers squeaked against the polished floor, a sound that echoed faintly in the cavernous space. He approached the reception desk, where a nurse with tired eyes looked up from her clipboard. "Hi," Noah began, his voice a bit hesitant. I found this guy yesterday, an older man in a wheelchair. He had a heart attack, and the paramedics brought him here. I just wanted to return this and check if he's okay." The nurse studied him for a moment, then smiled faintly. "You must mean Mr. Caldwell. He's in room 217. You can take the wheelchair up there yourself." "Thanks," Noah replied, relieved. As he made his way to the elevators, his thoughts were jumbled. He wasn't sure why he felt compelled to visit. Maybe it was the look on the man's face as the ambulance doors closed, a mix of pain and gratitude that Noah couldn't shake. The elevator dinged softly as it arrived on the 2nd floor. Noah stepped out and followed the signs until he reached room 217. The door was slightly ajar, and he peeked inside. Henry Caldwell was propped up in bed, his complexion pale but his eyes alert as he stared out the window. Tubes and wires connected him to machines that beeped softly in the background. Noah hesitated, then knocked gently on the doorframe. "Mr. Caldwell?" Henry turned his head slowly, his face breaking into a faint smile. "The kid, from the street. I didn't think I'd see you again." Noah stepped inside, awkwardly pushing the wheelchair ahead of him. "I brought this back. I figured you might need it." Henry chuckled weakly. "I appreciate that. You didn't have to go through the trouble, though." Noah shrugged. "It's no trouble. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." Henry motioned for Noah to sit in the chair by his bedside. "Well, you've got perfect timing. I could use some company." As Noah sat down, his basketball, partially tucked under his arm, rolled onto the floor. Henry's gaze immediately fixed on it. "Basketball, huh?" Henry said, a glimmer of interest in his eyes. "Yeah," Noah replied, picking it up. "I play, well, mostly on the street courts, nothing serious." Henry raised an eyebrow. "Doesn't look like nothing serious to me. The way you ran out there last night, you've got the quick reflexes of a point guard." Noah laughed softly. "I don't know about that. I'm okay, I guess. But it's not like I have a real team or anything." Henry leaned back against his pillows, studying Noah carefully. "Why not?" "You've got the passion. Anyone can see that." Noah hesitated. He wasn't used to talking about his dreams, especially with strangers, but something about Henry's curiosity felt genuine. "It's complicated," Noah admitted. "I mean, I love the game. I've been playing since I was a kid, but things are tough at home. My mom works all the time, and we're barely making rent. I work at a grocery store after school to help out, so there's no money for new shoes, let alone joining a real team." Henry's expression softened, and he nodded slowly, as if piecing together Noah's story. "That's a lot for someone your age." Noah shrugged again, forcing a smile. "It's just life, you know." Henry's eyes lingered on the boy for a moment longer before he spoke again. "You remind me of someone I used to know, a player I once coached. He had that same look in his eye whenever he talked about the game." "You were a coach?" Noah asked, his interest piqued. Henry smiled but didn't elaborate. "Something like that." The two fell into a comfortable silence, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of the monitors. "Tell you what," Henry finally said. "You keep playing, no matter how hard it gets. If basketball is what you love, you owe it to yourself to see how far it can take you." Noah looked down at his worn ball, the scuffed surface a testament to countless hours on the court. "Yeah," he murmured, "I'll keep playing." As he stood to leave, Henry extended a hand. "Thank you again, Noah, for everything." Noah shook it firmly. "Take care, Mr. Caldwell. I'll see you around." As he walked out of the hospital, the weight on Noah's shoulders felt a little lighter. For the first time in a while, someone had seen his potential, not just the hardships that came with his life, but the spark that kept him going. The familiar creak of the apartment door echoed through the dimly lit hallway as Noah Rivera stepped inside. The smell of fried food lingered in the air, a reminder of his mother's hasty dinner before her night shift. He set his backpack down by the door and glanced around their small, cluttered living room. The mismatched furniture, peeling wallpaper, and stacks of unopened bills on the coffee table painted a picture of the struggles they faced daily. His mother, Elena, sat at the kitchen table, her shoulders slumped from exhaustion. She was still in her janitor's uniform, her hair tied back into a messy bun. Dark circles underlined her tired eyes, but she managed a weak smile when she saw her son. "You're late again, mijo," she said, her voice weary but warm. "I stayed after school to help stock at the store," Noah lied, avoiding her gaze. He didn't want to tell her about the hospital visit or the late-night basketball practice. She already worried enough. Elena sighed, rubbing her temples. "You're working too hard, Noah. And then those late nights playing basketball. It's not going to put food on the table or pay the rent." Noah bit his tongue, a familiar frustration bubbling up inside him. He knew she was right in some ways, but every time she dismissed his passion for basketball, it felt like a part of him was being ignored. "I know, Mom," he said quietly, grabbing a glass of water. "But it's not just a game to me. Elena cut him off gently. "It's a dream, I know, but dreams don't keep the lights on. I don't want you to get hurt when reality catches up, Noah." Her words stung, but Noah forced a smile. "I get it. I'll be careful." The conversation ended there, as it often did, with a quiet tension that neither of them could resolve. Elena kissed his forehead before heading to her room to prepare for her night shift. Noah sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of overdue bills. He clenched his fists, a wave of helplessness washing over him. The next morning, Noah juggled school and his shift at the grocery store. By the time he got home in the evening, he was drained, but the faint buzz of excitement lingered. He couldn't wait to get to the basketball court. As he grabbed his basketball and headed out, the familiar voice of Mr. Thompson, their grumpy next-door neighbor, stopped him in his tracks. "Off to waste more time, eh, kid?" Mr. Thompson stood in his doorway, arms crossed, his face twisted in a perpetual scowl. Noah sighed but turned around. "It's not a waste of time, Mr. Thompson." "Sure it isn't," the older man scoffed. "You think running around with a ball is going to get you out of this neighborhood? Dreaming doesn't pay the rent." Noah swallowed his retort and walked away, his grip on the basketball tightening. He didn't hate Mr. Thompson, but the man's cynicism was a constant reminder of the reality he was trying to escape. At the court, the sound of sneakers squeaking and the rhythmic bounce of basketballs immediately lifted Noah's spirits. Jake Turner was already there, shooting hoops with a few other teens. The court was a little more crowded tonight, but Noah didn't mind. The energy was infectious. "About time you showed up," Jake called out, passing the ball to Noah. "Thought you gone pro and left us behind." Noah laughed, catching the ball with ease. "Not yet, but give me a few months." Jake grinned, always quick to encourage. "That's the spirit. Now, let's see if you've still got it." The two launched into a friendly one-on-one game, the rest of the teens watching and occasionally calling out commentary. Despite the cracks in the pavement and the dim streetlights barely illuminating the court, Noah felt completely at home here. This was where he belonged, where his passion for the game burned brightest. But as he jumped for a layup, his worn-out shoe caught on a crack, causing him to stumble and nearly fall. The laughter from the sidelines stung more than the embarrassment. "Man, you need some new kicks," Jake said, helping him up. Noah brushed himself off, his jaw tight. "I know." Jake clapped him on the back. "Don't let it get to you. Those shoes don't make the player. You do." Noah nodded, but the frustration lingered. He couldn't help but think about what Mr. Thompson and his mom had said. Maybe they were right. Maybe he was chasing something that would never happen. Still, as the game continued and the ball was once again in his hands, that spark reignited. Even if the world around him doubted, Noah knew one thing for sure. He wasn't ready to give up. Not yet. The dull rhythm of the evening unfolded like any other in the Rivera household. Noah sat at the small kitchen table, flipping through his homework without much enthusiasm. The faint hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of the floorboards were the only sounds breaking the stillness. His mother, Elena, stood at the stove, preparing a modest dinner after a long shift. Suddenly, the faint growl of an engine outside drew their attention. It wasn't the usual sputter of a neighbor's car or the rumble of a delivery truck. This was something smoother, more deliberate. Elena paused mid-stir at the stove, glancing toward the window. "Who's that?" she muttered, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Noah moved to the window and peeked outside. His eyes widened. "It's him," he said under his breath. "Who?" Elena asked, her tone sharp with suspicion. "The man I helped the other day," Noah replied, already heading for the door. "He's in a wheelchair." Through the dim light, they saw a black SUV parked by the curb. A young man, tall and sharply dressed, stepped out first, moving quickly to the passenger side. Moments later, Henry Caldwell emerged, seated in his wheelchair, his face breaking into a smile, as his nephew Marcus positioned him on the sidewalk. "Stay here," Elena said firmly, but Noah was already opening the door. At the base of the apartment stairs, Henry smiled warmly as Marcus adjusted the height of the wheelchair's footrests. He spotted Noah and waved. "Noah, my boy, good to see you again." "Mr. Caldwell," Noah said, stepping outside and heading toward him. "What are you doing here? Are you okay?" Henry chuckled softly, patting the arm of his wheelchair. "I'm doing much better, thanks to you. I'm here to return the favor, if you'll let me." Before Noah could respond, Marcus smiled and gestured toward the wheelchair. "You must be the famous Noah. Uncle Henry hasn't stopped talking about you." Noah flushed. "I was just doing what anyone would do." "Not anyone," Henry said, his tone firm but kind. "Most people walked right by that day. But you..." You didn't hesitate. Marcus wheeled Henry toward the apartment stairs, but the narrow steps posed a challenge. Is there a way inside? Marcus asked politely, glancing at Noah. Noah hesitated, then stepped aside, holding the door open. We can bring him through here. It's a tight squeeze, but it should work. Marcus maneuvered Henry carefully through the doorway, tilting the chair slightly to navigate the threshold. Once inside, the small living room felt even smaller with the addition of the wheelchair. Elena stood by the kitchen doorway, her arms crossed, her eyes wary as she watched them settle. You have a lovely home, Henry said sincerely, glancing around at the well-worn but tidy furnishings. Elena offered a polite smile. Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. But why are you here? Henry didn't miss the caution in her tone. He gestured to Marcus, who handed him a folder from his satchel. First, let me say I owe your son a great deal of gratitude. He didn't just help me when I needed it most. He showed me something I haven't seen in a long time, a rare kind of determination. Noah fidgeted under the weight of Henry's words, glancing at the folder in his lap. Do you play basketball, Noah? Henry asked, his sharp gaze catching the faint scuff marks on Noah's sneakers. Yeah, Noah said hesitantly. But how did you know? Henry chuckled. The way you carried that ball at the hospital, it was like it was part of you. I've seen that kind of love for the game before. Elena's expression tightened slightly, but she didn't interrupt. Let me get to the point, Henry continued. Before my accident, I was an NBA coach. I spent years working with some of the best players in the game. He paused, letting the gravity of his words sink in. And I still have connections. I want to sponsor you, Noah. Get you into an elite basketball training camp. This is your chance to see what you're really capable of. The room fell silent. Noah's mouth opened, then closed, the weight of the offer too big to process all at once. For real? Noah finally asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Henry nodded. For real? Everything's covered. Travel, equipment, the works. All you have to do is show up and give it your all. Noah's heart raced. A real camp? A chance to train with the best? It felt like a dream handed to him on a silver platter. But before he could speak, Elena stepped forward, her face set with worry. Mr. Caldwell, this is very generous of you, but we can't accept. Mom, Noah protested, spinning to face her. Elena shook her head. Noah, you have school. You have work. We're barely keeping the lights on as it is. This is a distraction we can't afford. It's not about the money, Marcus interjected gently. Uncle Henry's covering everything. Elena snapped, her voice tight. What happens if he puts everything into this and it doesn't work out? He'll be crushed. Or, Henry said softly, his tone steady, he'll find out what he's capable of. Elena, I understand your concerns. You want what's best for your son. So do I. But talent like his deserves a chance. Elena faltered, her gaze darting between Noah, Henry, and the folder. Finally, she turned to Noah, her voice trembling. And what about us? What happens if this camp takes you away? Who's going to help me with rent? With everything else? I'll still help, Noah said earnestly. I promise, Mom, but this could be my shot. The tension in the room was thick, and for a moment, no one spoke. I'll leave you to think about it, Henry said finally, his voice kind but resolute. There's no rush. I just hope you'll consider it. Marcus wheeled him back toward the door, pausing briefly as Henry turned to Noah. Don't stop playing, Noah. No matter what happens, don't let the doubts win. Noah nodded, watching as the SUV drove away, leaving behind a spark of hope he couldn't ignore. The next morning, Elena Rivera sat at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of bills she had been trying to ignore. A faint knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Noah looked up from the couch where he had been scrolling through his phone. I'll get it, he offered, walking to the door. When he opened it, Henry Caldwell was there again, seated in his wheelchair, his nephew Marcus standing beside him with his usual polite smile. Good morning, Noah, Henry said, his tone warm. Do you mind if we come in? Noah glanced back at his mother, who stood and gave a reluctant nod. Come in, she said, her voice cautious. Marcus carefully wheeled Henry into the small living room, adjusting the chair to face Elena, who had resumed her seat at the table. Noah stood off to the side, watching the exchange nervously. Mrs. Rivera, Henry began, folding his hands in his lap. I hope I'm not intruding, but I felt like we left things unfinished yesterday. Elena raised an eyebrow, her expression guarded. With all due respect, Mr. Caldwell, there's nothing more to discuss. I appreciate your generosity, but Noah has responsibilities here. Henry nodded, his gaze steady. I understand. And please, call me Henry. I want to assure you I'm not here to pressure you. I simply want to share a story, my story. Elena leaned back slightly, her arms crossed. I'm listening. Henry took a deep breath, his tone becoming reflective. Many years ago, I was in a position not too different from Noah's. I wasn't struggling financially, but I was chasing a dream. Coaching basketball was everything to me. It consumed my time, my energy, and my heart. He paused, his eyes distant as he continued. Then came the accident. One moment I was at the height of my career, and the next, it was all gone. I thought I'd never step foot on a court again. And for a long time, I let that loss define me. Marcus placed a supportive hand on Henry's shoulder, encouraging him to continue. I gave up, Henry admitted, his voice tinged with regret. I told myself it was the practical thing to do. I turned my back on the game I loved because I was afraid of failure, afraid of finding out I couldn't be the coach I used to be. Elena's expression softened slightly, though she remained silent. It took me years to realize that walking away wasn't practical. It was safe, and safe doesn't lead to growth. It doesn't lead to greatness. Henry turned to Noah, his gaze firm. When I see your son, I see someone who hasn't given up, someone with the drive and passion I wish I'd held on to. That's why I want to help him, because I know what it feels like to lose that chance, and I don't want him to feel that same regret. Elena's defenses wavered as she listened. Her eyes shifted to Noah, who was gripping the back of a chair, his face full of hope and determination. I hear what you're saying, Henry, she said carefully. But what happens if it doesn't work out? What happens if he puts everything into this and it falls apart? Henry smiled gently. That's always a possibility. But isn't it better to try and fail than to never try at all? And if he does fail, he'll have gained experience, resilience, and a stronger understanding of himself. Isn't that worth something too? Elena bit her lip, considering his words. Noah stepped forward hesitantly. Mom, he said softly, I know it's a risk, but I'll still do my part here. I'll work. I'll help with rent. I'll make sure I keep up with school. I need to know if I can do this. Please. The room was silent for a moment. Finally, Elena let out a long sigh, her shoulders slumping as the tension drained from her body. All right, she said reluctantly. You can go, but only if you promise to balance everything, work, school, and this camp. Noah's face lit up with a mixture of relief and excitement. I promise, Mom, I won't let you down. Henry smiled, visibly relieved. Thank you, Elena. You won't regret this. Elena offered him a faint smile in return. I hope not, Mr. Caldwell. For both our sakes. As Henry and Marcus left, Noah walked them to the door. Henry turned back to him before getting into the SUV. Remember, Noah, he said, his tone serious but kind. This is your opportunity. Don't waste it. I won't, Noah promised. Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. As the SUV pulled away, Noah stood in the doorway, his mind racing with possibilities. For the first time in a long time, it felt like his dream was within reach. The sprawling campus of the elite basketball training academy was unlike anything Noah had ever seen. State-of-the-art facilities stretched across manicured grounds with multiple indoor courts, a weight room that seemed to shine with newness, and a cafeteria buzzing with energy. The players, most taller, faster, and far more confident than Noah, milled about, chatting easily in designer athletic gear. Noah stood near the entrance, clutching his worn basketball and an old duffel bag. His sneakers, held together by duct tape on the soles, squeaked awkwardly as he adjusted his footing. He swallowed hard, feeling painfully out of place. First day's always intimidating, Henry Caldwell said, his voice calm and steady. Marcus had wheeled him into the gym a few minutes earlier, and now Henry sat beside Noah, his eyes scanning the room like a seasoned general assessing his troops. Noah nodded, his throat dry. Yeah, I feel like I don't belong here. Henry turned his sharp gaze to the boy. Listen to me, Noah. Every one of these players started somewhere. You're not here by accident. You've got talent and you've got heart. That's more than enough to prove yourself. Noah inhaled deeply and gave a small nod. All right. The first few days at camp were grueling. The coaches ran the players through drills that pushed their endurance, agility, and mental toughness. Noah quickly realized he was far behind in terms of physical conditioning. While other players sprinted up and down the court effortlessly, he often lagged behind, gasping for breath. His tattered shoes slipped on the polished court, drawing smirks from some of the other players. Yo, nice kicks, man, one boy sneered during a water break, his voice dripping with sarcasm. A few others laughed, their pristine sneakers gleaming in contrast. Noah clenched his jaw, choosing not to respond. He focused instead, untying his shoes tighter, as if that would somehow make them perform better. But the real struggle came during the scrimmages. Noah's streetball instincts clashed with the structured plays the coaches demanded. He made mistakes, missing passes, fumbling on defensive switches, and the frustration of falling short gnawed at him. That evening, Noah sat alone in his dorm room, staring at his phone. The weight of the day pressed down on him like a boulder. He thought about his mother back home, working tirelessly, and the sacrifices Henry had made to get him here. Doubts began to creep in. What if they were wrong about me? What if I really don't belong? The phone buzzed, jolting him from his thoughts. It was Jake. What's up, Baller? Jake's familiar upbeat voice brought a small smile to Noah's face. Just trying to survive, Noah admitted. This place is intense. I bet, Jake said. But you're there for a reason, man. You've got this. Don't let those rich kids intimidate you. You're better than half of them already. Noah chuckled softly. You're biased. Nah, just truthful. Keep at it, Noah. One day, they're gonna wish they were you. The call ended, but Jake's words lingered, rekindling a flicker of determination in Noah's chest. The next morning, Noah arrived at the gym early, before most of the other players. Henry was already there, watching from the sidelines. Couldn't sleep? Henry asked as Noah approached. Something like that, Noah replied, setting down his bag. I need to get better. Henry nodded approvingly. Then let's start. Over the next hour, Henry put Noah through a series of drills that focused on fundamentals: footwork, ball control, shooting form. His instructions were sharp and precise, delivered with the authority of someone who had spent decades mastering the game. But it wasn't just technical advice. Henry also shared mental strategies: how to stay focused under pressure, how to bounce back from mistakes, and how to read an opponent's weaknesses. Basketball isn't just physical, Henry said, watching as Noah practiced free throws. It's mental. You've got to outthink your competition, not just outrun them. Noah nodded, absorbing every word. As the week progressed, Noah's persistence began to pay off. During drills, he pushed himself harder, staying late to practice even when his legs felt like lead. Other players started to notice. His scrappiness, his refusal to quit, and his growing confidence on the court earned him nods of respect, even from those who had mocked him earlier. During a scrimmage game, Noah had a breakthrough moment. With the score tied and the clock winding down, he intercepted a pass and sprinted down the court. A taller player blocked his path, but instead of panicking, Noah executed a spin move Henry had taught him earlier that week. The crowd of players on the sideline erupted as Noah's layup swished through the net, winning the game for his team. Now that's what I'm talking about, Henry called from the sidelines, clapping enthusiastically. Noah grinned, his confidence surging. For the first time since arriving at camp, he felt like he truly belonged. That night, Noah called Jake again. You're not going to believe this, Noah said, excitement bubbling in his voice. I actually held my own today, scored the game winner. Jake laughed. Told you, man, you've got this. Thanks, Jake, Noah said sincerely. I needed that. Anytime, Jake replied. Now go show them who's boss. As the call ended, Noah lay back on his bed, staring at the ceiling. The road ahead was still long, but for the first time, he felt like he was on the right path. The gym buzzed with energy as the players warmed up for another day of intense scrimmages. Noah stood off to the side, stretching his legs and trying to calm the butterflies in his stomach. Despite the progress he had made over the past week, every scrimmage felt like a test he had to pass to prove he belonged. Henry Caldwell watched from the sidelines, his sharp eyes tracking Noah's every move. "Remember," he called out, his voice cutting through the noise. "Stay light on your feet. Don't force it. Let the game come to you." Noah nodded, his confidence buoyed by Henry's presence. He jogged onto the court, the ball already bouncing rhythmically in his hands. The game started fast and aggressive. Noah moved with purpose, darting past defenders and making quick passes to his teammates. But the competition was fierce, and every play demanded his full attention. By the second quarter, sweat dripped down his face, and his legs burned from the effort. "Keep pushing," the coach shouted from the sidelines. Noah's team was down by 2 points when he saw an opening. One of the opposing players fumbled the ball, and Noah pounced, intercepting it cleanly. He sprinted down the court, his eyes locked on the basket. Just as he reached the paint, a defender stepped into his path, forcing Noah to pivot sharply. It happened in an instant. His foot landed awkwardly, twisting at an unnatural angle. A sharp pain shot up his leg, and he collapsed to the floor, clutching his ankle. The gym fell silent as players and coaches rushed to his side. Noah gritted his teeth, trying to hold back tears as the pain intensified. "Easy, kid," one of the coaches said, kneeling beside him. "Let's get you off the court." Noah sat on the bench, his ankle wrapped tightly in ice as the scrimmage continued without him. The throbbing pain in his foot was matched only by the ache in his chest. He had been so close to making a play that would have turned the game around. Now, he felt like he'd let everyone down. Henry wheeled over, his expression unreadable. "How bad is it?" he asked. "The coach says it's just a sprain," Noah muttered, avoiding Henry's gaze. "But I'm out for at least a week." Henry nodded thoughtfully. "It happens to the best of us." "Yeah, well, the best of us probably wouldn't have twisted their ankle like an idiot," Noah snapped, the frustration in his voice surprising even himself. Henry didn't react to the outburst. Instead, he rested his hands on the armrests of his wheelchair and leaned slightly forward. "Listen to me, Noah. Injuries are part of the game. They don't define you. How you respond to them does." Noah sighed, leaning back against the bench. "It's not just the ankle. It's everything. My mom's back home, working herself to death, and I'm here messing up. I'm supposed to prove I deserve this chance, but all I'm doing is blowing it." Henry's gaze softened. "You think you're blowing it?" Noah looked away. "Aren't I?" Henry let the question hang in the air for a moment before speaking. "Let me tell you a story. When I was coaching in the NBA, there was a player on my team, an incredible talent. Fast, smart, unstoppable on the court. Everyone thought he was going to be the next big thing." "What happened to him?" Noah asked, despite himself. Henry's lips curved into a faint smile. "He tore his ACL during a game, took him out for the entire season. When he came back, he wasn't the same. Not because of his knee, but because he let the injury get into his head. He stopped trusting himself, stopped believing he could be great." Henry leaned back in his wheelchair, his expression turning serious. "You know what I learned from watching him? The greatest obstacle any player faces isn't their body, it's their mind. Injuries heal, but doubt? That can last forever if you let it." Noah absorbed the words, his fingers tightening around the edge of the bench. "What do I do then?" "You focus on what you can control," Henry said firmly. "You rest, you recover, and you use this time to sharpen your mind. Watch the games, learn the plays, and come back stronger. This setback isn't the end. It's just part of your journey." That night, Noah lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Henry's words echoed in his mind, battling against the doubts that threatened to overwhelm him. He thought about his mom, about Jake, and about the countless hours he'd spent on the cracked court back home. Giving up wasn't an option. Not for them. Not for himself. The next morning, Noah limped into the gym, his ankle still tender, but his resolve hardened. He sat on the sidelines with Henry, taking notes and analyzing every play. For the first time, he understood what Henry meant about basketball being more than just a physical game. It was about strategy, resilience, and heart. As the week went on, Noah found new ways to contribute, cheering on his teammates and offering advice during breaks. Slowly but surely, the respect he had earned on the court began to grow off it as well. And though he couldn't play just yet, Noah knew one thing for sure. He would be back, stronger, smarter, ready to prove to himself and everyone else that he belonged. The day of the showcase arrived with a mix of excitement and tension buzzing through the camp. For weeks, Noah had pushed himself harder than ever, both on and off the court. His ankle had healed just in time, and while it still twinged occasionally, he felt ready. This was his moment, a chance to prove he belonged here, not just to himself, but to the scouts in the stands and the teammates who once doubted him. The gym was alive with energy. Rows of folding chairs lined the sidelines, filled with coaches, scouts, and players waiting their turn. The banners of the Elite Basketball Training Academy hung high above the polished court, glinting under the bright gym lights. Noah sat on the bench, gripping his basketball tightly. His heart raced, not just from the pressure of the game, but from the weight of everything that had brought him here. His mother's sacrifices, Jake's unwavering support, and Henry's belief in him, they were all riding on this moment. Hours earlier, as Noah sat on the bench in the locker room, lacing up his worn sneakers, the sound of the door creaking open caught his attention. He looked up to see Marcus stepping inside, his usually calm face clouded with worry. "Noah," Marcus began, his tone soft but urgent. "Something's happened." Noah froze, his hands pausing mid-lace. A knot of unease tightened in his chest. "What is it?" Marcus took a breath, his voice steady but heavy. "It's Uncle Henry. He's in the hospital. Complications from his heart condition." The words hit Noah like a freight train. "Is he going to be okay?" "He's stable for now," Marcus reassured him quickly, though his own concern was evident. "The doctors are keeping him for observation. He wanted me to tell you not to worry, to focus on your game." Noah's chest tightened, his emotions swirling. The thought of stepping onto the court without Henry in the stands felt wrong. Henry had been his mentor, his anchor through the toughest moments at camp. How could he play knowing the man who believed in him most was lying in a hospital bed? Marcus stepped closer, placing a steady hand on Noah's shoulder. "He also said one more thing," Marcus added, his voice softening. "Play your heart out, kid. Show them what you're made of." Noah nodded slowly, his throat dry. He swallowed hard, trying to push past the storm of emotions. "I'll do it," he said quietly, more to himself than to Marcus. "For him." Marcus hesitated for a moment, then reached into the bag he carried. "There's one more thing. He wanted me to give you this before the game." From the bag, Marcus pulled out a pristine pair of basketball shoes, bright white with sleek black and gold detailing. Noah's breath caught in his throat as Marcus handed them to him. "They were Uncle Henry's idea," Marcus explained. "He had them made just for you. Said you needed something that matched your potential." Noah stared at the shoes in awe, running his fingers over the smooth leather. The weight of the gesture settled over him, heavier than any pressure he'd ever felt before. He looked up at Marcus, his voice cracking as he spoke. "I don't know if I can live up to this." "You already have," Marcus said firmly. "Now go out there and prove it to yourself." Noah nodded, swallowing back the lump in his throat as he slid the shoes onto his feet. They fit perfectly, as if they'd been waiting for this moment all along. As he tightened the laces, a newfound resolve surged through him. This game wasn't just about the scouts or his future anymore. It was for Henry, for everything he'd done, and everything he believed Noah could be. The whistle blew, snapping Noah back to the present. The game was starting. Noah's team faced off against some of the best players in the camp. The pace was relentless, the stakes high. Every pass, every rebound, and every shot was a battle. Noah's heart pounded as he moved across the court, his instincts sharpened by weeks of practice and Henry's teachings. For the first few minutes, Noah struggled to find his rhythm. The opposing team's defense was tight, and every move he made seemed to be countered. He glanced at the stands, searching for Henry's familiar face, but the sight of the empty wheelchair on the sidelines only deepened his resolve. "Focus, Noah," he muttered to himself. "Play your heart out." By halftime, Noah's team was down by 6 points. The locker room buzzed with tension as the players huddled around the coach, strategizing for the second half. Noah sat quietly, replaying Henry's words in his mind. "Outthink your competition, not just outrun them." When the second half began, something shifted. Noah took control, directing his teammates with newfound confidence. He made smart passes, positioned himself strategically, and found openings where none seemed to exist. With 5 minutes left on the clock, the score was tied. The gym buzzed with anticipation as both teams fought for the lead. Noah's legs burned with exhaustion, but he pushed through, determined to leave everything on the court. Then, it happened. With 30 seconds left, Noah's teammate intercepted a pass and threw the ball to him. Noah sprinted down the court, the noise of the crowd fading into the background as he focused solely on the basket ahead. A defender blocked his path, but Noah didn't hesitate. He feinted left, spun right, an exact move Henry had drilled into him, and leaped into the air. Time seemed to slow as the ball left his hands, arcing gracefully toward the hoop. Swish! The crowd erupted as the ball sailed cleanly through the net. Noah's team was up by 2 points, with only seconds remaining. The opposing team scrambled to make a final play, but their shot bounced off the rim as the buzzer sounded. Noah's teammates swarmed him, their cheers ringing through the gym. For a moment, he let himself soak it in, the victory, the validation, the sheer joy of knowing he had proven himself. After the game, as the crowd began to disperse, Noah stood at the center of the court, clutching the game ball tightly. The echoes of cheers and applause still rang in his ears, but the weight of what had just happened was only beginning to settle. He had done it, scored the winning basket in front of scouts, teammates, and coaches. For the first time, his dream felt within reach. As he turned toward the sidelines, a man in a sharp suit approached, weaving through the lingering crowd. He extended a hand to Noah with a confident smile. "Noah Rivera, right? I'm Greg Allen, recruiter for St. Joseph's Basketball Academy." That was some performance out there. Noah shook his hand, his grip firm but shaky. "Thank you, sir." Greg handed Noah a business card. "We'll be in touch. I'm confident we can find a place for you at St. Joseph's. Keep an eye on your email. This could be the start of something big." Noah stared at the card, his heart racing. "I will. Thank you." Greg clapped him on the shoulder before disappearing into the crowd. Noah stood still, staring down at the card in his hand. For a moment, the noise and movement around him faded into the background. He had worked so hard for this moment, but the reality of it felt almost unreal. "Noah!" a familiar voice called out. He turned to see his mother, Elena, hurrying toward him. She looked slightly out of place in the midst of the basketball crowd, her work uniform a stark contrast to the polished suits and athletic gear. But the pride shining in her eyes was unmistakable. "Mom!" Noah ran to her, wrapping her in a tight hug. Elena held on to him, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm so proud of you, Miko. You did it." Noah pulled back, his eyes glistening. "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom. For everything. For believing in me, even when I doubted myself." Elena shook her head, brushing a tear from her cheek. "No, Noah. This was all you. You've worked so hard, and now it's paying off." As they walked off the court together, Elena slipped her arm around Noah's shoulders. "Your father would have been so proud," she said softly. Noah looked down, a bittersweet smile crossing his face. "I hope so." Elena stopped and turned to him, her gaze firm but gentle. "He would be, and I know you'll make him even prouder with what comes next." Noah nodded, his heart full. The weight of his father's legacy felt less like a burden now, and more like a guiding force. He glanced back at the court one last time, the lights dimming as the gym began to empty. This wasn't just the end of a game. It was the start of something much bigger. As they stepped outside into the cool evening air, the glow of the gym lights fading behind them, Noah turned to his mother with a determined look. "Mom, I need to go to the hospital," he said. Elena's brow furrowed. "The hospital. It's Henry," Noah explained. "He wasn't at the game because he's be." Elena placed a hand on his shoulder, her concern softening into understanding. "Do what you need to, mijo, but let me know when you're with him, okay? I'll head home and wait for you there." Noah nodded, hugging her one more time. "Thank you, Mom. I'll let you know." As Elena walked toward her car, Noah scanned the parking lot and spotted Marcus leaning against the sleek black SUV. Marcus looked up from his phone, giving Noah a quick nod. "You ready for a ride, champ?" Marcus asked, a grin playing on his lips. "Can you take me to the hospital?" Noah asked without hesitation, urgency in his voice. Marcus straightened, his expression shifting to concern. Of course. Let's go. The drive to the hospital was quiet, save for the hum of the SUV's engine. Noah stared out the window, his thoughts racing. The game felt like a distant memory now. All he could think about was Henry. He's been stable, Marcus said, breaking the silence. But I know he'll want to hear about the game. Noah nodded. I just want to make sure he's okay. He's done so much for me. Marcus glanced over, a faint smile on his face. You've done a lot for him too, Noah. Don't forget that. The faint hum of hospital machines filled the quiet room as Noah stepped inside. His jersey was still damp with sweat from the game, his duffel bag slung over one shoulder. The victory should have filled him with elation, but instead, his thoughts were heavy with concern for Henry. Henry Caldwell sat propped up in the hospital bed, looking frailer than Noah had ever seen him. The usually sharp gleam in his eyes was dimmed by exhaustion, but his face broke into a soft smile as Noah approached. Well, if it isn't the MVP, Henry said, his voice hoarse but warm. Noah set his bag down and pulled up a chair beside the bed. I'm just glad you're okay, he said sincerely. I wanted to come straight here after the game. Henry waved a hand dismissively. Forget about me. Tell me about the game. Did you play your heart out? Noah nodded, his lips curving into a small smile. We won. I made the game-winning shot. Henry chuckled softly, a spark of pride lighting up his tired face. I knew you would. You've got the heart of a champion. For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of everything they had been through settling between them. Then, Henry's expression grew more serious. Noah, he began, his tone quieter now. There's something I need to tell you, something I should have said earlier. Noah leaned forward, his curiosity piqued. What is it? Henry took a deep breath, his hands fiddling with the edge of the blanket. Your father, I knew him. I coached him, actually, back when I was still in the NBA. The words hit Noah like a sudden gust of wind. He blinked, trying to process them. You coached my dad? Henry nodded, his eyes clouded with a mix of regret and nostalgia. He was one of the most talented young players I'd ever seen. Fast, smart, fearless on the court. But he had one flaw. He loved your mother more than anything. Noah frowned, confused. What do you mean? Henry leaned back slightly, his hands trembling as they rested on the edge of the hospital blanket. His gaze drifted past Noah, as if seeing a memory play out in the air before him. His voice, though steady, was weighed down by years of regret. When your father met your mother, he was unstoppable, Henry began, his tone tinged with both admiration and sorrow. He had the skills, the vision, the heart. I saw him leading teams, breaking records, becoming a household name. But then he fell in love, with her, your mother. Noah's breath hitched at the mention of his mom, but he said nothing, letting Henry continue. At the time, I couldn't understand it, Henry said, shaking his head. I kept pushing him to stay focused, to keep basketball his priority. I told him he could have it all, the fame, the legacy. But he needed to stay on the court. He'd smile and nod, but he never listened. He'd leave practice early to see her, skip team meetings to be with her. He loved her more than anything. Henry's voice broke slightly, but he pressed on. One day, I snapped. We had a fight, a bad one. I accused him of throwing away his potential, wasting what so many others could only dream of. He said something I'll never forget. He told me, basketball is a game, family is my life. And then he left. Noah's chest tightened, his throat dry as he listened. He had heard scraps of stories about his father's basketball days, but this felt like piecing together the last fragment of a puzzle he hadn't known he needed. Henry sighed deeply, the sound heavy with remorse. He walked away that day, not just from the league, but from me. I thought he was being reckless, selfish even. I let my pride get in the way, and I never reached out. I told myself he'd come back, but he didn't. He chose your mother, your family, over everything else. Henry paused, his gaze dropping to his lap. By the time I realized I'd been wrong, it was too late. I heard about the accident in the paper. I read his name, and my heart stopped. I'd waited too long to say I was sorry, too long to tell him I respected his choice, even if I didn't understand it at the time. A lump formed in Noah's throat, and he stared at the floor, trying to process the weight of Henry's words. His father had sacrificed so much, choosing family over fame, and Henry had lived with the regret of not supporting that choice. Henry's voice softened as he continued. When I saw you that day on the street, I didn't just see a kid who loved basketball. I saw him, your father. The way you moved, the way your eyes lit up when you talked about the game. It was like he was right there in front of me again. I couldn't ignore it. Helping you, Noah, it's my way of honoring him, of trying to make up for the mistakes I made. Noah finally looked up, his eyes glistening. I didn't really know him, he admitted, his voice trembling. But I've always felt like I had to live up to something. Like I was chasing a shadow I couldn't even see. Hearing this, it makes me feel like I finally understand him, what he stood for. Henry nodded, his own eyes misting over. You're not just chasing his shadow, Noah. You're building something of your own, and I see so much of him in you. Not just your talent, but your determination, your heart. You don't play for yourself. You play for the people you care about. That's what made him special, and it's what makes you special too. Noah took a deep breath, his resolve solidifying. I'll carry everything he stood for, everything you've taught me. I'll make you both proud. I won't waste this chance. Henry smiled, the faint glisten of a tear trailing down his cheek. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and Noah clasped it firmly. That's all I could ask for, Henry said, his voice steady despite the emotion welling up in his chest. Your father would be proud of the man you're becoming, and so am I. The two sat together for what felt like hours, though the steady beep of the heart monitor and the quiet hum of hospital machines were the only indicators of time passing. Henry shared stories from his years as a coach, tales of victory, defeat, and the countless lessons learned on and off the court. In turn, Noah talked about his life, his struggles, and the dreams that had once seemed so out of reach. Marcus eventually joined them, leaning against the doorframe with a soft smile as he watched the two bond. You've got him talking about the glory days, huh? Marcus teased, his tone light. Henry chuckled, his voice raspy but full of warmth. I might have mentioned a few highlights. More like all of them, Marcus said with a grin, stepping into the room. Noah, you should know, Uncle Henry has about 100 more stories just like these. If you're not careful, you'll be here all night. Noah laughed, the sound lightening the mood. I don't mind. I'm learning from the best. Marcus pulled up a chair next to Noah. He's right about that. Henry doesn't throw his belief around lightly. If he says you've got it, you do. Henry's smile softened, and he leaned back against the pillows. You both flatter me too much, but Noah, he added, his voice growing serious, remember this. What you do with that potential is entirely up to you. Don't waste it, and don't let anyone tell you it's too much for you to handle. Noah nodded, his chest tightening with emotion. I won't, I promise. As the conversation began to wind down, Henry's eyelids grew heavier, and Marcus gently urged him to rest. Noah stood, grabbing his duffel bag and glancing back at Henry one last time. Thank you, he said, his voice quiet but full of sincerity. For everything, for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. Henry's hand trembled slightly as he reached out, and Noah clasped it firmly. Go do great things, kid, Henry said, his voice steady despite his exhaustion. Your father would be proud. Noah nodded, his throat tight. I'll make sure of it. Marcus walked Noah to the hallway, his expression thoughtful. You know, Marcus said, breaking the silence, you've done more for him than you realize. I haven't seen him this energized in years. You gave him purpose again. Noah looked down, his thoughts swirling. He's done so much for me. I just want to make him proud. Marcus clapped a hand on Noah's shoulder. You already have. As Noah stepped out into the crisp night air, the weight of the evening settled over him. He paused for a moment, breathing deeply as he looked up at the stars scattered across the sky. His thoughts raced, not with anxiety, but with determination. He didn't just have a dream anymore. He had a legacy to uphold, a promise to keep, and the unwavering belief of those who mattered most. Noah tightened his grip on the strap of his duffel bag and began walking, ready to face whatever came next. The envelope lay on the kitchen table, its pristine white edges stark against the worn wood. Noah stared at it, his heart pounding in his chest. The logo in the corner, a bold emblem of the prestigious saint. Joseph's Basketball Academy, gleamed under the soft kitchen light. His mother, Elena, stood beside him, clutching a dish towel tightly in her hands. "Well?" she asked, her voice trembling with anticipation. Noah swallowed hard, his fingers hovering over the envelope's seal. He glanced at Elena, then back at the envelope. Finally, with a deep breath, he tore it open and pulled out the neatly folded letter inside. As his eyes scanned the page, the world around him seemed to fade, and then the words he had been longing to see jumped out at him. "We are pleased to offer you a full scholarship to St. Joseph's Basketball Academy." "I got it," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Then, louder, "Mom, I got it." Elena gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes as she grabbed Noah and pulled him into a tight hug. "Oh, Noah, I'm so proud of you." Noah held on to her, his own emotions bubbling to the surface. It wasn't just the scholarship. It was everything it represented. The late nights on the cracked street courts, the sacrifices his mother had made, the guidance of Henry, and the support of Jake. It had all led to this moment. Over the next few weeks, the Rivera household buzzed with excitement. Elena threw herself into preparing Noah for the move, though she tried to hide the bittersweet ache in her heart. As she folded clothes into his suitcase one evening, she paused, holding one of his old jerseys in her hands. "You've worked so hard for this," she said softly, her back to Noah. "I just hope I did enough to help you get here." Noah walked over, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You've done more than enough, Mom. I wouldn't be here without you." Elena turned to him, her eyes glistening. "Promise me you'll never forget where you came from, no matter how far you go." "I promise," Noah said firmly, "and I'll make sure everything you've done for me is worth it." The day of his departure was a whirlwind of goodbyes. Jake showed up early, his usual grin tempered by the weight of the moment. "Don't forget about us little guys when you're dunking on national TV," he joked, though his voice wavered slightly. Noah laughed, pulling him into a hug. "Never. You've always got a spot on my team." As they loaded the last of Noah's bags into the car, a familiar black SUV pulled up. Marcus stepped out first, helping Henry maneuver his wheelchair onto the curb. Noah's face lit up at the sight of them. "Henry!" he exclaimed, rushing over. Henry smiled, his eyes twinkling. "You didn't think I'd let you leave without saying goodbye, did you?" Noah knelt beside him, his voice filled with gratitude. "I don't even know how to thank you. For everything." "You don't have to," Henry said. "Just keep playing with that fire in your heart. That's all the thanks I need." St. Joseph's Basketball Academy was everything Noah had imagined and more. The courts were pristine, the coaching staff top tier, and the players a mix of raw talent and polished skill. For the first time, Noah felt like he was truly among peers who shared his passion. But it wasn't just about basketball. The academy pushed him academically and emotionally, challenging him to grow in ways he hadn't expected. And through it all, he carried the lessons he had learned from Henry, his mother, and the streets of Detroit. Months later, Noah stood on the court of a packed college arena. The sound of bouncing basketballs and squeaking sneakers echoed through the massive space. He was no longer the nervous kid struggling to keep up. He was confident, focused, and ready. On the sidelines, Henry watched from his wheelchair, a proud smile on his face. Marcus stood beside him, clapping enthusiastically as Noah made a clean three-point shot during practice. Elena sat a few rows back, her hands clasped tightly as she watched her son with a mix of pride and awe. Jake was next to her, shouting encouragements as if he were still courtside at their old neighborhood games. Noah wiped the sweat from his brow, glancing toward the stands. When his eyes met Henry's, he gave a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had shared. Henry nodded back, his expression saying everything words couldn't. As the coach blew the whistle to signal the end of practice, Noah jogged off the court, his teammates slapping his back and congratulating him on a solid session. He grabbed a water bottle and made his way toward the stands where his family and friends waited. "You looked great out there," Henry said, his voice filled with pride. "Thanks," Noah replied, grinning. "But this is just the beginning." Henry chuckled. "That's the spirit." Noah glanced around at the people who had supported him through every high and low. He wasn't just playing for himself anymore. He was carrying the hopes, dreams, and legacies of everyone who had believed in him. And as he looked toward the future, he felt ready for whatever came next. As the screen dims on Noah's triumphant moment, we're left with two powerful themes resonating from his journey: the importance of following your dreams and the transformative power of kindness. Noah's story reminds us that life is filled with challenges, but determination and resilience can turn even the hardest obstacles into stepping stones. His unwavering passion for basketball and his decision to never give up, despite countless doubts and setbacks, echo a truth we often forget: our dreams are worth fighting for. And what about Henry? His simple act of believing in Noah's potential not only changed the boy's life, but also helped him find peace with his own past. It's a beautiful reminder that small acts of kindness, like stopping to help someone in need, can ripple out in ways we might never imagine. Now, here's a question for you. What's your dream? Do you have a passion or goal that you've set aside, thinking it's too late or too difficult to achieve? Or maybe you've been on the receiving end of an act of kindness that changed your life. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your stories, dreams, or even the acts of kindness you've experienced in the comments below. Your perspective might just inspire someone else watching this video. And if Noah and Henry's journey moved you as much as it moved us, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. By doing so, you'll stay connected with us and never miss another heartwarming story like this one. Thank you for watching, and remember, kindness and dreams have the power to change lives, yours included. See you in the next story.